Welcome to the Open Apple Podcast, where we celebrate the Apple II. Whether you're a longtime user, a nostalgic visitor, or a newcomer to the community, join us as we share news and memories of Steve Wozniak's most famous personal computer.
Hello and welcome to Open Apple, the Apple II podcast. This is episode 40 for October 2014. I am Quinn Dunkey, and with me, as always, is Mike McGinnis. How you doing, Mike?
Wow, 40, man, this show is middle-aged.
Yeah, gosh, the time flies. It feels like we've only done 2.5 episodes.
Well, one of us has only done 2.5 episodes.
I was hoping you'd get that.
It's been an interesting ride, especially this year. But I think that everybody is pleased with my new co-host. I get a lot of great emails saying, "Oh, we missed Ken, but we love Quinn, so good job."
Oh,
so
excellent.
Yay on, well, not you. Yay on me for picking him.
Oh, yeah. Clearly, yes, the credit is all yours. So what's new with your Apple II? Anything exciting?
Been kind of a quiet week. I've had to remind myself how to do a driver disk on an Apple III for some hardware that somebody wanted, which is a very convoluted process. And if you'd like to learn the details of that, you can listen to Drop 3 Inches, my other podcast that I do with Paul Hagstrom. Plug. But, the scanner kind of gets some regular use here pretty much every day. Every time I finish scanning something, I look over at the pile of stuff, and that seems to be getting larger instead of smaller, which seems counterintuitive. But what about you, Quinn? What have you been up to?
Few things. I've got a tip for you for your Apple III problems. If you take a razor blade and you scrape that last slash off of the where it says 3 there, just scrape that last one off. I think you'll find it's a better computer then.
Oh wow! I see what you did there. Little humor, little funny,
little jabby jab at the Apple III. Yeah. No, actually, I'm really enjoying Drop 3 Inches because it is a neat computer that it's hard to find information on. So I'm learning a ton every time I listen to one of your shows. So.
And it's fascinating though. I mean, the first couple shows that I did with Paul, we're kind of not sure what we were going to talk about, and so it was sort of he and I rambling on and not really focusing as well as we should have and wondering what we were going to talk about next time. But we've actually had a lot of content sort of been thrown at us recently. So we've got a bunch of interviews lined up, and Dave Ottolini dug up some audio for a conference that took place in 1987 that has not been heard since then. And Paul has been hard at work cleaning that up, and those sessions will be released as episodes as well. So suddenly we're finding we have too much stuff, I think.
That's awesome. That's a good problem to have. So this is Drop 2 Inches, so let's get back to that. My Apple II exploits my programming projects have been progressing. I'm making good progress there. Hopefully I'll have something to show people before too long. Yeah, I'm doing a lot of talking and not a lot of walking at the moment. Trust me, it is coming. And in preparation for that, I'm kind of at the point where I need to start testing on real hardware, so I've been working on getting my 2C Plus up and running that I got at Kansas Fest. So I got the cabling in hand now, and I recently did something where I kind of felt like a chump, but I actually went online and ordered some floppy disks. And
wow.
I felt like sort of a chump because on the one hand, I mean, when I first got my first hard drive, I was so glad to be rid of floppies forever. And here I am buying them again. So that was a strange experience. And on top of that, of course, it's a 2C Plus, so I had to buy 3.5-inch discs. And 5 years ago, who didn't have a mountain of those in the closet, right? And I guess I'm too efficient about getting rid of crap that I won't need anymore, so I literally don't have one in my house. And I asked all of my friends, and none of them have any, at least that were in driving distance. So, I needed them for this weekend in order to get this going. So I literally had no choice but to order some on Amazon. So thanks to Amazon Sunday delivery, they arrived this morning. So I got to start working on that. So I have a box of shiny new floppy 3.5-inch floppy disks. The store that I ordered them from must be shocked every time they get an order for them at this point.
It always amazes me when I find companies that are still producing stuff for these old computers, not directly, obviously, but Avery, for example, the label company, that makes thousands of different sizes and shapes of labels that you can stick on just about anything, still makes 5.25-inch floppy disk labels, and they're called 5.25-inch floppy disk labels, and you can buy them just like with the rest of their stuff. There's a stock number you can order, and they will send you a box of these labels, probably laughing a little bit as they pack it for you, but yeah, it's shocking.
Yeah, that is awesome. When I was Googling to try and find somewhere local where I could just go and buy these floppies that I needed. I found that. I found the Staples down the street carries those labels. And I laughed and laughed. They didn't carry 3.5-inch floppies, but they carried those labels. I had a good chuckle about that one.
Now, I heard that Veronica made another outing.
Yeah, so this weekend was the 10th anniversary of the blog called Hackaday. I'm sure some of our audience probably reads that as well. It's just kind of a general blog about hacking hardware and devices in your house and just any sort of hacking in general, modifying things, building things, breaking stuff, fixing stuff, whatever. It's a fun blog, and they have posted over the years a few articles about my Veronica computer that I showed at K-Fest, and came time for their 10th anniversary. They did kind of a conference/party thing, and they had sessions and talks and so on, and so they asked me to come and give a talk about that. So I did that. It was local, so it was easy to do. I was out in Pasadena, and I drove out there, and I gave a quick talk. It was a compressed version. The talks were 30 minutes and with time for questions, so it ended up being 20 minutes. So I took my K-Fest talk and crammed it down into 20 minutes. It seemed to go over well, so they actually shot video of it as well, so I can link to that in the show notes if people are interested, although if anyone was at K-Fest, they would have seen it. I suppose if you weren't at K-Fest and are interested, this might be worth watching just because it's sort of a Reader's Digest version of the K-Fest talk. It's a nice recording. They had good equipment there, so I'll post it.
Yeah, and if you weren't able to catch the K-Fest talk, I highly recommend the video. What my co-host has done here with Veronica is just amazing. Blows me away every time I see it. So.
Aw, shucks.
And that's just to make sure that she comes back next month.
Yes. The route to my loyalty is through my ego, apparently.
So this month, let's see. Last month we had Gary Little on, and people really seemed to enjoy that. Hearing him talk about his days as an Apple II author and working at Apple, and then editing a A+ magazine went over really well. And this month we've got another great guest for you. So let's just get to the guesting.
The guesting? That sounds like a lesser-known M. Night Shyamalan movie.
That's a thing. Come on.
Hi, this is Al Lowe, and you're listening to Open Apple?
Softalk magazine was originally published from 1980 to 1984, and one of its many popular columns was a recurring piece by Roger Wagner. Roger's lessons were designed to teach Apple II users the ins and outs of 6502 assembly language in a friendly and easy-to-learn method. The column was so popular that when the original articles were gathered and republished as a book, it quickly became a bestseller, and even today remains a highly regarded and often recommended starting point for hobbyists interested in going beyond the basics. See what I did there? It's very collectible. If you find it on eBay, it's probably going to go for a lot of money if it's in decent condition. It was no surprise then when our guest recently announced that he was working with Roger to re-release a long out-of-print title, there was a whole lot of enthusiasm. When Chris also mentioned that he'd be publishing a second volume of Roger's material that never saw the light of day, the nerd squee reached heretofore unimaginable heights. Here to talk with us today about it all is Chris Torrence. Hello, Chris. How are you?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Doing good, thanks.
Good.
Excellent.
Quinn, why don't you start us off with some questions?
Well, the first one we always like to ask, of course, it's easy and it's a softball, but don't worry, the hard-hitting critical journalism is coming up momentarily. So yeah, how did you get started with the Apple II? Back in those days, there was so many choices, so much more than Mac or PC these days. So what was it about the Apple II that made you choose it over the others?
Oh, well, that's a great question, Quinn.
Why, thank you.
Sure. Well, it really started, I guess I was back in 7th grade, and this would have been about 1981, and so therefore you can figure out how old I am. I was taking a computer class, and we were using old DEC line terminals, printers, and I remember playing Oregon Trail on it, and typing in bang as fast as I could to get across the trail. And that's kind of really where I just kind of fell in love with computers in general. And then I did some research and started saving up for one, but at the time, the prices were kind of ridiculous. You had the kind of the cheaper ones and the more expensive ones. And of course, unfortunately, the Apple was in the more expensive camp. And so I was originally shooting for like a TRS-80, and I had about $400 saved up, which I think would have been close. I forget what the exact prices of those were. And then a computer store actually was opening up near my house, and they were having a grand opening contest where they were giving away a free computer. So of course my family and I went to it, and for some reason they had this ballot box and they had no rules or regulations about how many times you could submit your name. And so since there was 4 of us total in our family, we just kept stuffing the box, and along with everyone else, I should add. So it wasn't just us. And then we were the lucky winners. And so we won an Apple II Plus family system, which was the one that kind of came with, not just the computer, but a whole bunch of software. And so then once I had that, I was able to actually take the $400 and instead buy a monitor for it, because it didn't come with a monitor. So I remember buying a nice neck color monitor, and that was kind of the beginning of my love for the Apple II. And then over the years, I kind of, I used it all through high school and, for lots of papers and projects, and wrote a lot of programs on it. I remember doing some program for one of my teachers so that they could do the grading for my class. And I looking back on it, I probably should have programmed in like my name or something and gotten an A+ or something, but I didn't think of that at the time. And then, once I graduated, I sort of fell away from it for a while because I didn't take it to college. And, it was really only just a few years ago when I kind of got back into it, kind of realized that there's kind of this renaissance that's going on now in kind of retro computing.
So what was it that brought you back in after all that time?
It's funny you should ask. It's actually, I got a Raspberry Pi for a Christmas present, and I wanted to play around with it, and I started doing some research, and then, discovered pretty quickly that you can actually interface them with an Apple computer. And I was like, well, that's really cool. And I have my 2 Plus in the basement, so I'm just gonna try that. And so once I dragged it back up and put it on my desk, well, then I sort of just kind of started using it constantly and just kind of, remembered why I had enjoyed using it so much, and just been having fun playing with it ever since. That's
great. So you have the original 2 Plus that you had back in the day.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it's funny. I listen to all the, these interviews, and people are always lamenting at that, they gave it away at a garage sale, and then they're, but somehow miraculously my mom hung on to it for about 20 years, and then I brought it out here, and it's still fully functional. And I have to admit, though, I also have a 2E, just because, the 2 Plus has its limitations, and the main one being the lack of lowercase. And so I have a 2E that I probably use more than the 2 Plus nowadays. But
I was just done through the Raspberry Pi interface. Is that through Ivan Drucker's A2 Cloud and A2 Server?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so I've got it all set up on that. Yeah, actually now I'm really just kind of plugging it more straight into my Mac and just using ADT Pro to transfer files back and forth. And so the Raspberry Pi, I kind of every now and then I'll log into it as a kind of a dumb terminal from the Apple, which is that's kind of fun too, because then you can kind of pretend you're using Linux on the Apple, which is pretty cool.
So obviously right now, the big thing that you're working on, other than the Raspberry Pi stuff, is getting Roger Wagner's assembly lines books, recompiled and republished, or what's going on there? Yeah,
that's a good way to put it. I had read all of his articles back in the day because I got, I had a subscription to Softalk, and I foolishly, that was the one thing I did not hang on to, is I recycled almost all of my Softalks, about 15 years, which was, just looking back on it, was stupid. And so I actually ended up having to rebuy them all on eBay, and I'm still missing, I think, the first 3 issues from 1980. So if anybody has any leads on those, I'd be really appreciative.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, I know. eBay is your friend and your enemy in that case. But yeah, so I really had enjoyed the assembly lines articles, and I had picked up a copy of Roger Wagner's book, the Volume 1, which was the first, I think, 16 articles. And then I quickly realized that there was supposed to have been a Volume 2, and it was never published. And it just happened that, that was the exact time when Softalk was going out of business. And there was even announcements in the last few issues of Softalk about, Assembly Lines Volume 2 is coming real soon. And then it never came out. So then I just thought, well, that's kind of a shame that, there's all these people who, they can get Volume 1 fairly easily, but they don't really have any good way of getting at the articles. And at the time, there wasn't really a project to put the PDFs up online. And so I thought, well, why not try and actually contact Roger Wagner and see if he'd be interested in, having me help to publish these articles. And initially, he's pretty tough to get in touch with. He's very busy, and but once I got a hold of him, he was more than happy to, have someone take an interest in it, and he's just kind of giving me free reign to do whatever I want with the project, which is great.
So the name assembly lines, that means something to most Apple II users probably, but can you just tell us a little bit what it was exactly? How did it sort of serve the community at the time?
Yeah, sure. So it was originally a series of articles in Softalk magazine, and it was really kind of Roger Wagner's way of gently introducing people to assembly language programming on the 6502. He just started out with a real brief introduction to the architecture of the Apple, and then kind of slowly built up in each article. He would add a few more instructions, starting with the easy ones. How do you load a number from memory? How do you put it back in memory? How do you interface with AppleSoft Basic? And then from there, he just kind of built, and each article just kind of got more and more complex, and he would do things like, well, how do you do high-resolution graphics from assembly language? Or how do you modify DOS to do different things? And by the end of it, he was doing some fairly complicated programs, like, for like a game or something. And it was just really a really cool way to kind of teach, your average user who maybe was just kind of using the Apple for their day-to-day things, but teach them a little bit about assembly language programming. And if you were more serious, you could kind of take his articles and then just go from there and, read more and do even more cool things.
So that's not to be confused with Apple Assembly Line, which was a newsletter by Bob Sender-Cederloff, which was also sort of a recurring thing about assembly language programming. So this was the series of columns that was in Softalk magazine.
Yes, that's correct. And actually, speaking of that, Bob Sender-Cederloff his website has actually been invaluable because, you can still find all of his dumps of all of the ROM in the Apple with all of the, his annotations on it. And I've actually had to use that quite a bit when I've been editing the book just to check facts and things.
Right. Yeah, it's actually, he's got his own sort of family site where he's hosting that. And we'll have a link to that in the show notes because it is a great reference for anyone. He's got a lot of neat tricks in there for assembly programming. And also, Asimov has a very large archive of everything sort of related to that. So we can link to that as well. But the online version is a nice quick reference. So, sort of jumping ahead to the present day then, so tell us a bit about this so-called Roger Wagner Volunteer Archivist role. What is that, and how did you sort of fall into that?
Well, I'm not exactly sure on the timeline for that. I don't remember if I contacted Jim Selmans or if he contacted me, but so the Softalk Apple project is it's basically a project to take all of the Softalk magazines and get them digitally preserved, so PDFs, high resolution PDFs, and then run them through OCR, but then kind of go to the next level and actually do adding a lot of like metadata, meta information about the articles in the magazine. So all the articles, all the advertisements, and everything is going to be cross-linked, and you'll be able to do, some really cool kind of data mining. And so he found out that I was doing this project with the assembly lines articles, and then, asked if I wanted to be this kind of volunteer archivist is the title that he came up with. It's really cool because, there's a website now and you can get to a lot of information about Softalk. And then also, I'm kind of taking on that role of the Roger Wagner archivist, whatever that means. And it's just been a lot of fun. And so we exchange a lot of emails about what's going on. And, he's getting a lot of support through the community, him and, his wife Timlin. And they're just doing a great job with the project. And I think it's going to be really cool once they have the whole thing up and, assembled on the website.
So in addition to the sort of the ones that everyone would have been able to read back then, there's also going to be this sort of volume 2, and these are ones that were not released before, or how does that relate?
Yeah, so volume 1 was published, and that one had all the articles from the first 16 articles from Softalk. So my book is actually going to be all of the assembly lines articles. So all the ones that were in volume 1, as well as all of the articles that appeared in Softalk but were never actually published in book form. So there's a total of 33 chapters, plus all the appendices which were in the original Assembly Lines book, the Volume 1 book. So it's things like all of the 6502 instructions, there's an ASCII table, interesting locations in the ROM, and things like that. And I'm trying to make it's interesting because I have this challenge where I'm publishing it as if it had been published back then, but at the same time, I'm kind of doing it with kind of more modern, it has a more modern look and feel. And, obviously I can, mention things that, we didn't necessarily know back then. Like, for example, in the chapter about the 65 CO2, it had just come out when Roger wrote that, and so he didn't really know how it was going to shake out in terms of, which vendor was going to support which instructions. So I've been doing things like adding a lot of footnotes where, I can say, okay, well, this instruction isn't actually available on the Apple. But at the same time, I don't really want to change his original content too much either. So it's kind of this fine balance.
Okay, yeah, that kind of notation is going to be really valuable. That's something that I've been running into myself recently. I've been doing some programming and reading these old books. And yeah, at best, some of these old books, they have like an appendix that's added for the 65 CO2. And at worst, yeah, there's no mention of it. And like you say, yeah, it's not clear which of the extended instructions are supported, and it was actually a little bit tricky to sort of figure that out. I had a couple of missteps where the assembler would happily assemble instructions that didn't exist, and then of course the Apple II wasn't too happy about that. So in addition to the assembly lines books, then so you're also archiving Roger Wagner's other work. Is that correct?
Yeah, I haven't done that much with that because I've been really focused on the book, but the eventual goal is to, find out what was all the software that he published? His company was, Southwestern Data Systems, and so they published a lot of different communication software as well as obviously things like the Merlin assembler. And then going through all of the Softalk issues and just finding references to him and his company and just kind of collecting that all into one big database, if you will, where you can kind of just get a feel for his impact on the Apple II community through the years. So that's the idea, but I haven't really gotten to that stage of it yet. I'm just trying to focus on the book.
How far along are you in this process? When can we expect to be able to get our hands on the books?
Well, that is a great question. So I just finished, as of a couple days ago, I finished the last chapter. So it's all, I'm using OpenOffice to author it, and so it's all in there. All the code has been typed in. I couldn't use the OCR from the PDF for the code because it got all mangled.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I ended up just typing in all the code, which was a good learning experience anyway. And then of course I could test it to make sure it actually worked. So I have all the code typed in, and it's pretty close to being done. I think I obviously need to do the cover, and I have it out for review right now. I've got some great proofreaders. Antoine Vigneault is one of them. John Groover is another one, and then Sean Lewis. And so the three of them are just doing a great job at kind of, the nitty-gritty of going through and checking all my assembly instructions to make sure they're correct and everything. And so cross your fingers, it'll hopefully be maybe a couple months, so in time for the Christmas holidays. So if you're looking for that special gift for someone who really wants to do 6502 assembly programming, this could be a good choice for that. One thing I should add though is there's no profit in any of this. So that was one of the things that Roger and I agreed with is, we were just going to sell it at cost. What I'm planning on doing is actually hosting it through Lulu, which is a print-on-demand service, and then they also cross-post it on Amazon. So it'll be on Amazon. You can buy it there. And I'm just going to sell it for whatever the cost is, and I'm not out to make any money on this.
Now, you mentioned Lulu as the print-on-demand portion of this. Is this also going to be available as an ebook or paper only?
That's a good question. I don't know. Maybe you guys have an opinion on this. I originally was kind of resisting doing an ebook because I really like the idea of having like a solid print book that like for example, Stephen Wyrick's book, which is sitting actually right next to me, those were all available on his web pages, so you can go and read it. But it's just having the physical book is just kind of so cool, with all of this content and just being able to flip through it and find stuff. So I've kind of been resisting doing an electronic version, but, I know a lot of people would really prefer that. So I don't know. Do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, I think you'll probably find sort of equal quantities of people that like both. So it's probably a worthwhile thing. Myself personally, as much as I do like paper books, especially the old ones with that old Apple II book smell, it is awfully nice to have all of my references right here on my iPad, so I can just search for things and just sort of have all of my references everywhere I go. And so, yeah, I guess I'm partial to the PDFs, even though I do like books as well. So that would certainly be my vote.
I tend to agree. I think that the search function goes a long way for me because you said it's OCR'd, and so it's going to be searchable. And if I need to to look something up, I can't remember how to do a routine, or I need to figure out why this B&E is not working the way that I think it is, I can just search real quickly on my iPad instead of trying to flip through an index and then flip back through. But there's certainly also an appeal of being able to hold the paper book in my hand as well. So if you just chose to go with the paper, I don't think anybody would complain that loudly, but having the ebook there is certainly a nice function. I know that some of the publishers, when you buy the paper copy, you automatically get access to the EPUB as well. Maybe that's something to think about. So,
I think in some sense it's going to end up as an ebook no matter what, because no matter what you do, someone's going to scan it. And so, so you might as well be the one to do it. And then you kind of have control over, the quality of it and make sure it looks nice. And
yeah, I mean, you touched on a key point there, I think, which is that for me, at least, a bad PDF is worse than a paper book, but a good PDF is better than a paper book. So there's lots of scans and ebooks out there that are terrible. Some of them are, 500 megabytes, and they're so poorly rendered that the iPad takes 3 seconds to switch pages, and, and those are maddening to try and read electronically. So for those, I would have rather just had the paper book. But if it's done well, it's great. So, if it's OCR and searchable and it's lightweight and, the tables are all aligned properly and so on, then it's good. But I'm guessing probably more work to do it well than to just scan it.
Well, and another thing too is I also want to definitely release the code that I've all typed in too. So I have that all saved as, disk images in both DOS and ProDOS. And, I should just put those out there as well. And I guess those could just go along with the PDF.
And if possible, it's nice to be able to see the code easily on a modern machine. Like I found this problem as well with these older books that, the disk images for the pack-in floppy are available. But to use that code, I have to open that disk image in an emulator and then load it in emulated software and try to copy it out of Virtual 2, because I'm doing all my coding, on the Mac, in CC65. So if I want to copy and paste code out of one of these old floppy disk images, it's kind of like 18 steps, which is sort of funny. So if there's a way to sort of just copy and paste it out of a web page or a PDF that I can view, on my Mac, that would be great too.
One thing that I've seen, and I don't know that this would have any applicability to what you're doing with Roger, but so J.W. Rinsler has published those fabulous hardcover, making of Star Wars, making of Empire Strikes Back, and Jedi, and they're these tomes, they're big heavy tomes, and they have gorgeous pictures and stories that have been told that have never been heard before and things like that. The ebook version, what they've done is they've also added in, short video clips and audio clips of interviews that happened with George Lucas, back in 77 that you've never heard before. So there's this value added thing that's going on there as well. So maybe, like I said, I don't know that you could sit Roger down and interrogate him about stuff in that, or if that would be interesting, but that's something that I've seen as well. Yeah,
that's a fantastic idea. I've kind of thought about flying out to, I think he's in Southern California, I want to say. Cause at one point he was saying, I think I have some lost chapters that never made it in, and, something about floating point arithmetic or something, but, they were like lost in a storage shed of his, and he's like, well, you're welcome to come down and take a look in there, cause he said he saved everything from his,
wow.
Yeah, which is very tempting. So maybe it's worth a trip down there.
Well, now Mike's put this idea in my head, so I'm expecting a director's cut with some sort of interview of maybe Roger and Steve Wozniak reading the book together and, commenting on the code, something like that. I'll accept no less.
Okay. I'll get right on that.
If you don't, you can expect a very harsh review on Open Apple.
That's right.
Well, I'm already expecting that, there's going to be all these probably criticisms and things that I've gotten completely wrong. And even though the articles were written 30 years ago, and I'm sure there's boo-boos in there somewhere. So I'll be prepared for it.
Now, are you working, how closely are you working with Roger on this? You'd mentioned that he just kind of turned you loose. Is this sort of a thing where you submit a chapter to him and get his approval, or are you just like off in your office and then it's done and you hand him the finished product?
I think that's going to be pretty much it. Yeah. I sent him, when I first started, I sent him, I think like the first 8 chapters or so, and he said it looked great. Anything that any support I needed from him. And so I think at this point, I pretty much need like a kind of a blurb from him about, kind of what he's been up to. I'd like to, kind of say, okay, what have you been doing the last 30 years? And then just maybe an up-to-date photo of him, like an author's photo. Other than that, I think it's just, I'll just give him the finished product and, maybe I can get an autographed copy from him or something for myself. And that's going to be it.
You just tell him, we don't need you, old man. I got your stuff.
That's right.
So, Chris, those efforts are great. You mentioned that you've still got your 2 Plus and your 2E that you're playing with. So, how do you use your Apple II today? What are you doing with it?
Well, obviously, as you guys point out in every episode, I love to play games on it. I did that a lot as a kid. So every now and then I'll just kind of pull out some old game and fire it up, or actually, maybe an even newer game, right? Like some of the new ones that have come out. So a lot of that. And recently, of course, I've just been doing a lot of the programming of the assembly line's code. It's kind of funny because I do a lot of work on the Virtual 2 emulator just because it's easier. But every now and then I'll, if it's an especially long program, I'll just fire up the Apple and actually code it up in Merlin on the actual hardware just because it's so, it's so much cooler to just do it on the actual computer.
That's hardcore.
It's old school.
That's right.
It's fun.
Respect.
It's so much fun. Yeah, and then, then of course I have to transfer it back, using ADT Pro back to my Mac so that I can then actually physically copy the code out from the, because otherwise there's no way to paste it into the document.
Right.
So it's kind of, clearly it's, way more steps than, are, necessary, but it's still fun.
You can take a photo of the screen and then OCR it.
I didn't think of that. That's a great idea.
That's what I do. It works great.
Well, it's kind of funny. I've actually roped my family into helping me at some point. So I think one of my daughters was reading assembly language code back to me so I could double check it, which I'm sure to them it was just complete gibberish, but it was fun for me. So
still gibberish to me most of the time too, but
yeah, true.
Fumble through anyway. So you mentioned gaming. What is your favorite game? And the correct answers are Lode Runner and Choplifter.
Definitely Choplifter, Karateka, I would say. In
of course,
fact, I have my little Karateka t-shirt on right now. So those two, Wizardry, I played a lot of Wizardry back in the day. I only got up to, I think, Wizardry 3, and then at that point I kind of moved away, so I'd never played the fourth one. So I was thinking I should actually go back and try those again. They
pretty much just got worse as they went on. So after the first one, you might just want to switch to Ultima.
Yeah, I played a little Ultima, but for some reason I liked Wizardry more.
You're off the show.
Oh no!
This is an Ultima show.
Olympic Decathlon, that was another one of my favorites too.
Yeah, I love that one. People rag on it a little bit because the graphics are primitive because it was such an early one, but my sister and I played the crap out of that game.
Yeah.
Just hours and hours.
The keyboard killer.
Yes,
yeah, I was just going to say, just being able to mash the arrow keys left and right. And
to this day, I think that the arrows and the 1 and 2 key on my 2 Plus are completely worn out.
My dad wouldn't let me play that game because he was afraid I'd break the keys.
Well, he was not wrong.
Yep. Yeah, speaking of your dad, not your dad, but my dad. And,
wait, what?
How do you know Mike's dad? Yeah.
It was always funny, though, because I mentioned how we won the computer, and it was actually my dad's name that they pulled out of the bucket or whatever. And so anytime he wanted to play a game, and his favorite game was Castle Wolfenstein for some reason, he would just kind of throw that out there. He's like, well, I was the one who won the computer. And so, of course, then he boot us off and then go off and happily play Castle Wolfenstein.
It's a good trump card.
Yeah, it was a good one.
My sister's trump card was that she's a foot taller than me, so she'd just punch me in the arm and kick me off the stool. That was also effective.
All right, well, I guess that brings us to the news, and we got lots of it this month.
Get what's new and exciting in retro computing with 2 News.
It's been a busy few months for the Apple II community. Why don't we dive right in? I just can't resist talking about Dagenbrock's videos once again. So for those who have been living in a cave and or don't listen to Open Apple, in which case you're probably not hearing this anyway, Dagenbrock has started a video series on programming for the Apple II GS. He's been busy, so we talked about episode 0 last time, and since then he's done an episode 0 follow-up, where he kind of answers questions people had and that sort of thing, which is great because it kind of makes the process a little interactive, which is kind of a fun way to deal with the community, almost like a podcasting model where you sort of take emails and respond to them on the next show. And he's also done an episode 1 since then. So it sounds like he might be taking a little bit of break before episode 2. He's busy with stuff. They continue to be great. So he's got still doing the animations and the titles, and they're lots of fun to watch. So have you seen these things, Chris?
I have. Actually, I watched the first one, and it's kind of funny because I never really played around with the 2GS. It just kind of came after I, had stopped for a while, and, I'm kind of frozen in time back at the 2 Plus and 2E. And so it's just very cool to see the type of things you can do with the 2GS, even just entering a few instructions. So yeah, he's doing an awesome job, and I love his beard too.
Yes.
Very cool.
Yeah. The 2GS is interesting because it's very much an Apple II, but it's also very much a modern computer in many senses of the word. The CPU is structured such that it's got real memory management, and it can run a sort of a modern style operating systems and easily run relocatable code and all these sorts of things that you need for modern computing. And so it's sort of just on the other side of that line into the realm of modern computing from the Apple II, but it's still very much an Apple II. So it's fun. Dagan's videos are great.
I never had a 2GS growing up like you, Chris. I'm sort of stuck in the 8-bit Apple II era, but I found that, and I talked about this last time, I sat in on Dagan Brock's Kansas Fest presentation of the 2GS assembly language, and I found them, even though I don't know much about the machine, I found them very easy to follow along with, and what he was saying made a lot of sense, and it made me feel like it wouldn't be that hard for me to at least kind of learn some basic stuff about programming the 2GS. And as I watch the YouTube videos, I'm seeing the same thing in that presentation as well. He's got a very kind of, I guess, approachable teaching style that, so even if you've never done assembly language at all, you may not understand the specific instructions, but the concepts come through, and at least for me, they stick. This one's been sitting in the pile of things that I meant to talk about going back to early August, and for whatever reason, I think we just ran out of time last time, but the unofficial Apple weblog, TUAW, had for a long time a series of podcasts, and they wrapped those up, and they've replaced them with this new documentary series called Slices of Apple. They say that if you ever wonder what makes Apple tick, the company is notoriously secretive about its products, but perhaps has been even more secretive about how it operates on the inside. They're doing a series of short little videos talking about different portions, I guess, of Apple history and events and people. And it's a neat series. I think they're up to episode 8 now, and definitely worth checking out if you're into the history of the company.
So are these videos then, Mike, or?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I haven't actually watched these. I'm going to check that out.
The most recent one, for example, is part 2 of Real Artists Ship. Which was sort of Steve's mantra when he was trying to motivate people to do the extra work and stay late and produce for him.
So next, we unfortunately have a little bit of sad news, as many of you I'm sure know, since RCR scooped us once again. Shake my fist at you. But unfortunately, Douglas E. Smith, the author of Lode Runner, has recently passed away. I think there are probably few Apple II users whose lives were certainly not impacted by that particular game. So I myself it was pretty much all I played for a big chunk of my childhood. It was such an amazing game. I mean, just the gameplay was so well tuned, and there was so many levels and so many challenges, and the editor was this whole new dimension. I remember I had this distinct memory of I'd been playing Lode Runner for probably a good year or two, and I had no idea the editor was in there. And somewhere, I think it's on the school bus or something. This would have been elementary school. I overheard someone saying that there was this editor in it, and you just had to push this certain key combination, and it appeared. And so I was so excited, ran home from school that day and did it, and my little brain melted. It was so exciting. And so played with that for years afterwards. So just, really, really incredible game, seminal work, and we will miss you, Douglas E. Smith. You guys want to share some Lode Runner memories?
Yeah, I would say exactly what you said, Quinn. I mean, that game, you could just spend so much time just running up and down the ladders, and just kind of, you get to these places where you would just think you'd have it, and then you would just make a wrong move, and then you'd be trapped, and it was so frustrating. But that and Championship Lode Runner 2, which was kind of the same thing, but kind of amped up, and that one was even harder. And now, did he design the levels for the Championship Lode Runner as well, or was that someone else?
I actually don't know. I didn't play a lot of that one because, it was just so much tougher that I never quite could get a handle on it. So I'm not sure if he built those levels or not. The gameplay was so well tuned, which wasn't that common in those days, but just every little aspect of it, the timing of when you started digging a hole, there was that sort of minimum amount of time required for the digging to start. And so it sort of set this boundary where you had to be at least this far away before you could dig a hole. And there was just every aspect of the game was filled with little details like that really added this depth and strategy to it. It's such a quintessentially Apple II game, there was never a decent version of it on any other platform. And it had the Apple II look with the blue and the white and the orange, It was one of the early games to do really make it actually good use of the colors in a way that didn't have lots of fringing and other artifacting. They sort of worked with what the hardware could do, and so they were very clever in how the sprites were, built sort of with the little orange caps on their heads and the stripes, the way the stripes in the chests were sort of laid out so that it didn't fringe. And so everything, just every aspect of it was just so well polished. It really was amazing. Mike, how about you? You must have played some Lode Runner.
When you start a game on a modern platform, PC or Xbox or something today, if your game gives you 20 hours of play, that's a long game these days, I just think back to, and not just Lode Runner, but Ultima and Wizardry and some of these action games that were, the action was repetitive, but it was repetitive in a good way. It was addictive, and you kept coming back to it. You could play these for hundreds and hundreds of hours. There were 255 levels for the original Lode Runner. And that was one of the few games I actually finished. I sat down one day and said, I'm going to play this entire game. And I forget how many hours it took me, but I got through all 255 levels. And then I said, well, let's take on Championship Lode Runner. And I got my butt kicked because I think I remember reading this in a magazine at the time that Championship Lode Runner was 50 of they compiled 50 of the hardest levels that other people had created. I don't know if how accurate that is. Could probably spend some time on Google if I wasn't completely lazy about it. But I remember that with Championship Lode Runner, if you finished all 50 levels, you would get this code on the screen and you could send it into Broderbund and they would send you back a certificate. And I think there was a t-shirt and I don't know that I ever saw one of those or heard of anybody that beat it. I'm sure the number was very low, but this was certainly a game on which I spent many, many hours as a youth when I should have been doing homework or outside talking to girls or something. Quinn, you'd mentioned the graphics, and the kind of the iconic orange bricks and the white ladders, and the sound always sticks with me. When I hear that kind of two-tone, the digging sound.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Or when you've fallen into your own trap and you're waiting for it to close on you.
Yes.
And that sort of zipping up sound.
Yeah.
It's, very kind of triggers some really great memories for me. So I love this game. And I know it's been a long time since Douglas has been active in the Apple II community in any way. But I'm sure there are a lot of fans out there, obviously, that are going to miss him. And I think maybe in 2012, we were actually trying to track him down to have him come on this very show and talk to us. And we were not able to find a contact for him. So it's kind of sad to learn that now we will not have that chance.
There was actually, over on the Compsys Apple II, there was a guy that had posted after that news broke, and he actually had worked at the same company just a few years ago, and he actually posted kind of this interview that he kind of a semi-informal interview he had actually done with Douglas Smith, like just late one night. He just sat him down and they just had this text chat back and forth, and so he posted the entire transcript of this over there, and it's definitely worth reading. It's pretty cool. So at least there's something that he wrote about that, and so maybe you can put that in the show notes.
For sure, yeah, that's excellent. We'll definitely put that in the notes. Okay,
next up we have, this is sort of an odd one, and I forget how I stumbled upon this. Oh, I know. I have a Google alert for Apple II News. There's a Southern rocker named Joe Eli, I think I pronounced that correctly, who recorded an album 30 years ago using his Apple II and an Alpha Centauri, and he called it B484, so B484, and used a Roland 808 drum machine, which I guess back then was kind of a big deal because they didn't really have a lot of these fancy electronic drum machines. So that was also innovative. And when he turned it into the record company, the executives said, "We love this. We cannot sell this. Please go record this using more traditional studio methods, and he and his band went back and re-recorded it. Didn't sell very well. Well, now he has dug up the original tracks, the Apple II Alpha Centauri tracks, and released that album on his own. And here's a little sample of that. So I thought that was sort of an interesting thing. He did an interview with the San Antonio Current, which is kind of an alternative news thingy down there, down in San Antonio. And he talks about how he ran his own BBS on his Apple II back then, and somehow ended up talking to Woz late at night. He would have these conversations with Woz, and Woz ended up writing the liner notes for this, which are now included with B484. So I don't know that this is everyone's taste, but if you're interested, you can check it out on iTunes, and you don't have to buy the whole album. You can just buy one of the 99-cent songs.
That's fantastic. What a great example of how the Apple II touched so many people in all walks of life. It's easy to talk about it as sort of computer nerds that we are, but lots and lots of people were sort of deeply moved by that computer.
Speaking of stumbling upon things, found this link. It's called cbm8bit.com. It's the retro computer scene search engine, and so it's a search engine that searches the archives of different platforms of computers. So when you go to the main page, and we'll have a link in the show notes, you can choose whether you want to search Atari archives or Apple II. They've got Commodore 8-bit, the Micro B, the Tandy machines, the BBC Micro, the Oric, Amiga, and they have a bit saver search function. Now, currently they only have two servers indexed for the Apple II, and those are Asimov and GNO. But it looks like that is a total of 21,876 files totaling 230 gigabytes. So sometimes things like Asimov can be a little challenging to search, and wondering what you're actually getting, because things are not always named in the most obvious manner. But I don't know. I find this thing kind of fascinating that you can just have an all-in-one search engine like this specifically for your retro computer files.
That is kind of neat. I don't know why anyone would ever want to search for Commodore or Atari stuff, but
well, of course not. It's ridiculous.
I suppose someone might. I don't know.
Oh, and it looks like they've added a SID music search engine. So if you're into that, I haven't really looked at that too much, but you might want to check that out.
Yeah, SID is just showing off, really. I think it's compensating for something. That's the defensive Apple user posture on sound.
Gotcha.
We're just jealous. What about you, Chris? You ever use anything retro besides Apple computers?
Nope, it's pretty much just the Apple. Never really got into any of the other gaming systems or anything. I never had an Atari or anything like that. So just stuck with the Apple.
Just the one that mattered then, right?
Exactly. That's right.
Correct answer. Okay, moving on. So last month we talked a little bit about the ImageWriter 2 that made a cameo in *Halt and Catch Fire*, and I thought it was really charming to see that. Chris, I don't know if you're watching *Halt and Catch Fire*.
I have not actually managed to catch an episode of that yet. I need to. You guys keep talking about it, so
yeah, it's pretty entertaining. So yes, second last episode of season 1 had a brief cameo by an ImageWriter 2, sort of thinly disguised as something else. And that got me thinking about printers, and sort of coincidentally on the Apple II enthusiasts Facebook group, there was a bunch of threads about printers recently. Everybody was talking about ImageWriter 2s, and yeah, I just feel like it's something that printers in general don't get a lot of love in the retro computing sort of hobby these days. It's one of those areas. It's a bit like, I think, BBS is in this way, where they're sort of not getting brought along with the rest of the retro computing hobby, just because there's this sort of infrastructure required that is going away. You can't get the paper anymore, or there's just sort of no need for them. Plus, I think at the time they were sort of obnoxious in a lot of ways. It was something that you owned because there was no better way to do what they did, but nobody really liked dot matrix printers, I don't think. They were loud and slow and annoying. Apple made some really great ones, so I think it's worth sort of giving them a little love here. I wanted an ImageWriter 2 for a really long time. I remember when I first got one, it had the 4-color ribbon, which I thought was just amazing. One of my friends at school had the Scribe printer. He got it with his 2C, and I thought that thing was awesome. I mean, I understand at the time how poor the quality was, because it was just the fact that anything was printing that came off your computer at the time was sort of amazing. So the fact that it was poor quality was sort of lost on me, but I just loved how quiet it was. That was sort of magical, because I had an Epson, I don't know, FGX something dash 84 whatever, something. And, sorry, Earl. But, and you know, it was a good printer, but, you know, it sounded like someone was shooting a machine gun at a wall of tin cans, and, you know, it took forever to do anything. So I guess I don't exactly want to hook up a printer anymore, but it's sort of, I don't know, I have some fond memories of them. What about you guys? Do you remember your dot matrix printers?
Oh, yeah. I had a Okidata, however you pronounce that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that, I mean, it was great at the time, right? Because, you know, that was the one that you could actually, you know, if you, I forget how to do it, but if you switched some certain mode, then you could actually print out graphics on it. And, you know, it was pretty complicated to switch between graphics and text. Yeah, I mean, I printed, probably every term paper from, you know, 8th grade all the way through, you know, the end of high school on that thing. And, I mean, that's the good thing about those printers is, you know, I just dug it out of my basement a few years ago, and the thing, I mean, it just looked like it did, you know, 30 years ago. I'm sure it would have worked if I would have taken the time to actually plug it in. You know, I think you're right. I think the problem is that's one thing where you don't really, the nostalgia factor is not worth trying to get the paper and get the ribbon and remember how to use it. And, you know, you can just use an emulator and print from those now, unfortunately. So.
Yeah. I remember the ads for the Okidata printers. They were sort of, they seemed like magic, because they were sort of I don't know, I guess one of the earlier only sort of big color printers. And so they always had these beautiful color images in the ads that had allegedly been printed on this thing. And I just thought that was amazing to me. I don't know if they were nearly as good as the ads made them out to be. But,
No,
but yeah, when I finally got the ability to print in color with the ImageWriter 2, I got one used with my GS. That was amazing. I mean, I used to love printing stuff in color. You know, I think it cost something like $12 a page or something by the time you added up all the ink and stuff, because of course it scrolled all 4 colors on the ribbon regardless of what color was being used. So if you printed a, you know, solid red document, you lost that amount of all of the other colors. So hardly efficient, but it was pretty cool that it did it. How about you, Mike?
The first Apple printer that I encountered was my dad called it the not-so-silent type. I've told the story before about how he used to bring home the Apple III from NCR every weekend at his job and work on it. And it came with, the Apple III had built-in functionality for the silent type and I think maybe the DMP or the DWP. And man, this thing was loud. Although I guess maybe in comparison to, you know, one of those high-speed dot matrix printers hammering away at 3 a.m, this was probably a little quieter than that. My dad kind of had to set a rule where I was not allowed to print things after he went to bed because it would wake them up. And then with our 2 Plus, he bought an Epson FX or RX 80. I forget which one, whichever one wasn't the good one. That's what he bought. And I remember that Computist magazine had this program you could type in where you would put your Ultimate Disk in and it would build a map of Britannia based on the code on the disk, and it would print this thing out. And it was like 24 sheets of paper or something like that. And you would tape it together. And I remember him getting up at 3 a.m. and yelling at me for trying to print this thing out while he was sleeping. And I don't miss the old days of the clattering and the banging around. But the thing is, I recently scanned this, the Apple Service Level 1 Technical Procedures, and it had take apart instructions, and basic PM stuff for a couple of Apple's printers. And I was looking at this thing, and there must be some sort of voodoo or magic or something in there keeping these things running all these years later, because there are just so many moving parts and they're all delicate and they all require so much care, and yet they seem to come together and work pretty well. So for me, there is sort of an interest in, you know, digging around in the internals, because it's not something that I've always hated printers. You know, I've never if somebody wanted me I could fix your computer, but I would not touch your printer. If you had a problem, just, you know, call HP. I don't care. So kind of rediscovering that recently and seeing maybe an elegance in the design of these things has been very interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good angle, actually, to think about these things. They really were sort of electromechanical wonders of the time. I mean, you know, tiny little, moving parts in them. And frankly, they are probably, wearing out. There was a thread recently on the Facebook group about someone had bought an image writer 2 and some of the pins in the head were seized or something, and they were trying to figure out how to take it apart to lubricate things and get it working again. And, it's a lot like an old car or an old clock, delicate moving parts. They get stuck and they seize and they have to be sort of coaxed back to life. So it's, I'm sure some people out there would be very interested in that scan.
The sections in Binder that I scanned that were the printer sections were far thicker than the computer sections as far as the maintenance and take apart and stuff, because just there are all these little sub assemblies with tiny delicate parts, and it's warnings all over it that you could damage this and the printer would stop working if you didn't do that. So yeah, it's kind of, I've been kind of digging around in that, and I found it very interesting.
Cool.
I don't know why, but
well, we'll link to that scan in the show notes. Oh, and we should give a shout out to the emulation, Image Writer 2 emulation in Virtual 2. If any of our users that are not using Virtual 2 yet, well, A, what's wrong with you? And
no kidding.
B, it has a lot of sort of really cool hidden features that people might not know about. And one of those is the Image Writer 2 emulation. So you can actually fire up Print Shop and make greeting cards, or fire up Toy Shop and make the little Steam engine, which I never got to work. We'll print them out as a PDF, which, then you can dump out on your laser printer or take it to Staples or whatever. But, it's really well done. Like, it has the sort of, it has that dot matrix pixeliness to it and the sort of slightly fadedness of the ink. It's just, there's attention to detail in it, just like the rest of that program. It's awesome.
Yeah, Virtual 2 is, there's a freeware or shareware, I guess, version of it that I think it's limited, or it only lasts for 30 days or something like that. And it's got kind of the price tag seems kind of high. I think it's $59, $49, which for emulation, when I first saw that, I was like, wow, that's kind of high. But when I bought this thing, I mean, it's been worth every penny. Just the amount of effort that Gerard puts into this thing, and the fact that it's continuing to be updated. If you're emulating the 2GS, you want Sheppy's Sweet 16. If you're emulating Apple II 8-bit, you want Virtual 2.
For sure, especially if you're developing. Virtual 2's actually got some really powerful debug stuff in it that I've been using. You can actually pause the machine, and it's got this whole other window where you can examine memory and step code and do all kinds of sort of meta level stuff that you would have killed to have been able to do back in the day with the real machine. Like, what is this interrupt doing? Why is it corrupting this memory or whatever? So you can kind of just watch it happen. So that's, really, really powerful stuff. Yeah, there's a couple of different price points on it. I think there's like an entry level price and a higher level price that has some of the fancier stuff like the Apple scripting, which is also great for programming. You can write unit tests and so on in AppleScript for your programs. For me personally, the higher tier is worth every penny for sure. I keep finding new stuff that it does that is so useful, and I have yet to want to do anything that it doesn't do, so it's great.
We have a bunch of game stuff to get to. There's a couple more news items that I guess we can wrap up with. OregonLive.com has one of those click-through photo galleries of supposedly the world's largest collection of Apple prototypes. I assume that means outside of Apple Computer. Most of it is more recent things, Toaster Macs and Newtons and things like that. But they also have, as part of this collection, is Jeff Raskin's Apple II, his original one that he modified to use as Swift card. And it's kind of interesting to see the spacebar all chopped up and the modifications that he made to that Apple II.
Yeah, there's some great photos in there. We'll definitely link to that in the show notes.
Lotus 123 has come to an end. I know that doesn't seem like maybe it's all that related to Apple II, but we like to kind of close the regular news section out with something that isn't really related to Apple II, it seems. I think we did that last month too.
I think so too, yeah.
But this is might be of interest simply because Lotus 123 was the company that ended up killing VisiCorp and VisiCalc, that and along with all the legal problems they had. ZDNet.com has a farewell and a brief history of the program. I remember that it was introduced at Comdex in Vegas, I think in maybe 81 or 82, and then actually went on sale the following January. And basically from the day that it came out, it outsold every version of VisiCalc combined and never looked back. VisiCalc went from 700,000 monthly sales or something to like less than 2,000 in a year because of Lotus. So farewell and rest in peace, Lotus 123.
Oh, and we should mention that the dates have been announced for Oz K-Fest. and they've made a call for sessions as well. So we'll link to that in the show notes. I've never been to an OzK Fest, but I imagine it's awesome. I imagine it being like regular Kansas Fest, but upside down, and everybody's talking about what's really a knife.
Send your hate mail to.
That's right. But the hate mail will be in a funny accent.
Yeah, I would like to point out here that Andrew Rowan actually had emailed me about this almost a month ago. It arrived in my inbox literally like 24 hours after we had recorded the previous show, and I took so long editing September's show that this is actually kind of feels a little bit late because, well, it is. It's been announced everywhere else, but if you're in that area of the globe, probably worth checking out and hanging out with some cool guys and doing some cool stuff with Australian Apple IIs.
Yeah.
I wonder if the Apple IIs like talking in that accent.
Yeah, or maybe they're just upside down on the desks. I don't know. Or when in the winter they're actually warm and in the summer they're actually cold.
Right.
I don't know. There's some. What about you, Chris? Have you ever been to a K-Fest in any continent?
No, I have not, and I really wanted to go this past summer, but just my travel plans didn't quite work out right, and so I'm really hoping to get there next year. Yeah, hopefully next summer I'll be able to go to the K-Fest. Well,
you no longer have an excuse not to go now that I know that you live like 10 miles away from me, so I'm just going to come gather you up in my car, and I think I have 2 other people already that are going to join us maybe, and you're going to come and have a good time, and that's
all right. That sounds awesome.
We do have some game news before we get to the actual game section, I guess. First is that apparently Oregon Trail LARPing is now a thing.
This blows my mind.
Yeah, it's crazy. The AV Club has an article about this, and well, here's what they say. Here's how it works. The teams of 2 to 4 people, many in pioneer garb, build a wagon out of paper and dowel rods before tackling 10 challenges inspired by the computer game. Things like floating the wagon across a kiddie pool, shooting at game with Nerf guns, competing in a 3-legged dysentery race to an outhouse. Oh my God.
Wow. This just keeps getting better.
Instead of finding shelter, we build a tarp tent while volunteers spray us with water. We survive being pummeled with pool noodles by roller derby girls at the Platte River Station. What on earth is going on here?
Can we do this at the K-Fest next year?
I think we have to. Yep, I think we do. This is called the Oregon Trail Live. It's run by the Willamette Heritage Center in Salem, Oregon. But as they point out, you could easily adapt this general structure to be played at home, which is why it must be played at Kansas Fest now. So yeah, it just fascinates me what people do with their imagination and too much time on their hands.
Well, what I want to know is, since everyone knows the best strategy in Oregon Trail was to go through the entire game naked and use all of your money on bullets, I'm wondering, has anyone done that in the LARP yet? If so, video or it didn't happen. So, some of you may remember a while back there was a Kickstarter from the original creators of Wasteland, and they were going to set out to make a sequel, Wasteland 2, and it's finally available. So that's super exciting. I know for myself, and I'm sure a lot of Apple II users, Wasteland was easily top 5 best games on the platform. And I think for me personally, it has the distinction of being the first RPG I ever actually finished. I played a great many of the Ultimas. I played all the Ultimas, but only finished a couple of them. So Wasteland was the first one that I actually played all the way through. How about you guys? Did you play Wasteland?
This is when you're going to throw me off the show when I say, nope, I never played it.
Wow.
But I know, but I've been waiting to play this one, but I cannot download it because I know if I do, I will get sucked into it, and then you will never see the assembly lines book. So I'm waiting till it's done, and then I'm going to buy it.
Well, if you've not played the first one, then I don't think you're allowed to play this one. I think if you try to install it, there's actually a screen that says, just go buy Commodore, and then it kicks you off.
Okay, I'll play the first one first then.
There were a number of, I guess, spiritual successors, if you wanted to call them that, in the Fallout series. I played 1, 2, and the Brotherhood of Steel, which is just an awful game. But and I bought Fallout 3, but there were so many bugs. But it's Bethesda. What are you going to do? I couldn't get anywhere in that game. But this is being described as the first direct sequel to 1988's Wasteland. There are 2 versions available. You can get it on GOG, Good Old Games, or Steam. There's the digital classic edition, which includes the manual, 3 wallpapers, the reference card, and some other free goodies. The download is 9.6 gigabytes, so fairly large.
And we will definitely link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, so I'm having trouble finding the link to the other version of it. Sorry, folks, I'm lazy and not interested in Googling that much. It costs, I think, $10 more and has a bunch of other extras. And so if you are at all interested in the game, if you were a fan of the original, I think probably worth $39.99 at least.
Yeah, this is one of those things where the Kickstarter actually materialized into an actual product, which doesn't happen as often as we would like. And when you mentioned Fallout being the spiritual successor, I think it was actually even a little more than that, because as I recall, some of the original team from Wasteland actually were trying to make Wasteland 2, and the project kept getting canceled or something, or they weren't getting the resources, and so they actually went off and made Fallout, since they couldn't get permission to use the name Wasteland or something like that. So it's actually, I think, sort of a fairly direct sequel to the original.
I think you're right, and I don't know if that was the time. That was around the time maybe when Interplay started having all its problems and eventually closed its doors. But you can get those games as well on GOG and maybe on Steam. But like the original Fallout and Fallout 2, those games are only like $5. If you want to check those out, definitely do it. There's no reason not to. I'm looking at GameSpot right now. They reviewed it and they gave it an 8 out of 10, which I think is a pretty high rating for them. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking through some of the other Google results I have here, and people seem to really like this, which sometimes spiritual successors and sequels that are 30 years later and things like that, turn out to be big pieces of garbage. And it looks like this is not one of those. I do like this headline here that says, Wasteland 2 is an RPG that lets you kill absolutely everybody. So check it out.
For sure. Yeah. And actually, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Fallout Tactics as well, which is sort of a lesser known member of the series. That was it's sort of tongue in cheekly called the good part of Fallout. It's just the combat portion of it. Basically, it's a whole sort of spin-off game that's just a whole series of combats using their, really detailed turn-based combat game. And if you like turn-based strategy games, it's really, really well done. So, that's also worth playing, which I'm sure is also on GOG as well. I played Fallout 3 on the 360, and I really liked it. Like you said, it was definitely buggy, but it was definitely a Bethesda game. It didn't feel like Fallout or Wasteland.
In other gaming news, Prince of Persia turns 25. My goodness, I'm old.
Doesn't look a day over 20.
Of course, Jordan Mechner recently got together with Jason Scott and Tony Diaz. And there was a big article in Wired magazine about rescuing, finding the source code. His father, I guess, found the shoebox in the closet that had his original discs and the source code. And they went out and kind of helped him get the code off those discs and make it available. I think you can download it now. He's released the source code to anybody who's interested. It's neat to see that it seems that experience seems to have gotten Jordan back into gaming a little bit, at least kind of the retro gaming stuff. He remade Karateka, which I guess didn't do very well, but digitalspy.com has a little retrospective on the game and what it meant to people, so worth a read.
Yeah, the source code is actually a really good read. It's really nice code, and I definitely learned a lot of tricks for programming the 8-bit apples on it. What about you, Chris? Have you looked at the source code at all?
I did, and I'm really tempted to actually try and compile it. I don't know. Do you know if anybody's actually gotten it to successful compile and run or anything? I know people have tried, but...
Yeah, I know people have tried. I don't know if anyone has succeeded yet, actually.
I think that would be very cool to be able to do that. But
yeah, I think the assets are not available, as I recall. I seem to remember he couldn't get the rights to those or something, so it's just the code and not the artwork or something.
Okay.
So you wouldn't be able to actually build it into something that you can run. It's really nice code.
I think somebody in maybe Constance Apple 2 started a thread about how they went through and had to, I want to say he had to go and extract those assets from the original disk and stuff like that, but he was able to create his own disk image from the source code. So it took a lot of work, but it's not something you can just sit down and do in a night. But.
Yeah, well, it had a really exotic copy protection on it too, so it might be difficult to even just create a disk image using regular tools. I mean, maybe they had to compile the code and then also crack it in order to, because I know one of the things I liked reading about in the source code was sort of all of the hoops that it jumps through to load the data off of this sort of wacky disk format. They had was like 18 tracks or something that they did to sort of make it not copyable. I remember that when I finally got a cracked version of that, it was one of the coolest cracks ever. It required 2 floppy disks, 2 floppy drives, and you put 1 disk in each drive, and it would jump back and forth, and it would boot 1 track off each drive alternately. It was awesome. I'm sure there's since then there's been simpler cracks, but that was, I think, one of the early attempts to do it. I know that, I wonder how that'll affect the archiving folks. I know that, Paul Hagstrom and some others are, putting out a big effort to archive a lot of these games with the copy protection intact, because that's, the only reason we have any of these games, of course, is that they were all cracked. It's for historical record purposes. It's nice to have the intact versions with the copy protection.
And I guess that brings us to our weird gaming section.
So this is, I guess, a new segment now officially, as we, in case anyone hasn't been paying attention, we've kind of decided we're going to bring more gaming content back into the show, and rather than just talk about Choplifter and Lode Runner endlessly, even though we could certainly do that, it might be
those games suck.
Yeah, it might be fun to dig deeper into the catalog and find some of the weird stuff. So. Mike, why don't you start? Because this is really interesting. Tell us about Dirty Harry Adventures.
No. Yeah, so I added this little item to the spreadsheet here, and this is a game called Dirty Harry Adventures, and I think it was actually just written by some guy in his bedroom and spread around the pirate boards. I can't imagine that any company would want to have anything to do with this, and if they found out that one of their programs had done it, would have immediately fired him. It's it's not even really a text adventure in any sense of the word, other than that there's text and no graphics, but it's just you're presented with a scenario. It starts out with the woman being raped, and your choices are you can shoot the rapist, you can shoot through the woman to hit the rapist, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. And basically, if you don't choose the absolute worst option, the game ends because you get caught by I guess the other cops or killed or whatever.
Wow.
It's rife with grammatical and spelling errors and which makes me think that like a junior high wrote this thing, and we've all we haven't all done something like this, but we've all written little things that never got maybe got passed around to our friends and never got any further. What's surprising to me is I had a copy of this through some stuff I'd traded as a kid and saw it once, but it surprises me that if you go on to it's in the Internet Archive, and there's the Virtual 2 online emulator. It's a disk image there. This thing has spread itself everywhere. It seems to be like part of the oeuvre of actual Apple II games, and it just shocks me that this would have come out of that age at all. So it's racist, it's misogynistic, and crazy violence. But since this is weird gaming, that struck me as something that I should go, wow, that's really strange.
That's excellent. That's exactly the kind of stuff that we're looking for in this segment. But wow, my brain is still stuck on, you can shoot through the woman who's being raped, and then it goes downhill from there. So that was the high point.
That's the start of the game. Now, if you boot the disk image and control reset, it's just a standard DOS disk, and it's like 3 or 4 AppleSoft basic programs, and it's not even there's no parser. You don't type anything in. It's just it's a multiple choice thing from one to the next. You pick A, this happens. You pick B, and so forth and so on. There's no sophistication at all to this, and so the interesting thing to me, like I said, was that this thing has survived.
Yeah, definitely sounds like the product of angry teenage angst, and somehow it got out into the zeitgeist, and now it's archived forever. Lucky us.
Blows my mind. But Quinn, I think you have something more positive and uplifting to talk about.
Yeah, let's spin that up a little bit and get back into some quality entertainment here. So I think everybody knows Rocky's Boots, and in fact we talked about it last month. It made also an appearance in Halt and Catch Fire. We talked about it in our Halt and Catch Fire segment. But what a lot of people don't know is that it had a sequel. For anyone if you've been on Mars for all this time, you don't know what Rocky's Boots is. It was this educational game where there was a column of scrolling shapes on one side of the screen, and you had a boot on the other side of the screen, and you had these components that you stuck together. They were logic electronics components, so OR gates and AND gates and things like that, and you would wire them up, and depending on what the little detectors that detected the shapes were doing, you would wire up things to kick the boot and knock certain shapes out of the column, and so they're used to solving puzzles in this way. So it was an educational tool for teaching digital logic, and it was really clever, really well done. A neat game that I think a lot of people have played. Then they went off and made a sequel, which was just turned everything up to 11,000. It's called Robot Odyssey 1. It is in fact called Robot Odyssey 1 because it says right in the manual that this is going to be the first in a series of adventures involving robots, and there was never a sequel. So nothing guarantees failure of a franchise more than naming the first game Robot Odyssey 1. But it is in fact a great game, and it's much more difficult than Rocky's Boots. It sort of takes the same concept and builds kind of a world around it. So you're a little dude running around in these sort of maze-like environments in this underground metropolis, and you're trying to escape. And you've got this collection of robots at your disposal. So you're carrying around these robots, and at any time you can put down the robot and climb inside it, and then it's sort of a Rocky's Boots style environment inside the robot. And so the robots have sensors and thrusters, and you've got all these components to program the robots, and you sort of program the robots by building these circuits inside them to solve puzzles. And so there's various puzzles to collect key cards and defeat monsters and unlock doors and all these things to sort of navigate through the environment. So basically everything in the environment kills you, but nothing kills the robots. So you have to sort of use these robots to do your bidding through all the way through the environment. It's just, I can't think of a better sort of educational game than this. It really is fantastic even today. You know, it is challenging. So it's sort of like a early teens maybe level game. I certainly never solved it, but it's fun to play even today. I mean, it gets really quite advanced towards the end. You can actually burn chips in the game. So if you have a piece of a circuit you want to reuse in other robots, you can actually burn it into a chip, and then you find chips in the game, and so chips, you cannot go inside them. So once you've burned it, you have to remember what it is. And they have a little number on them, and you actually can find chips in the game, and you have to reverse engineer them to figure out what they do just by applying signals to the inputs and seeing what the outputs do. Just maddening. And then some of the puzzles, I've since gone back and played it a lot, and some of the later puzzles that I got stuck on, now I see, they expected you to build, a shift register here, or, a ripple carry adder, or some, pretty sophisticated things for teenage level, or kids game. So it's no wonder that, not many people solved it. So, yeah, it was a fantastic game, and one that I think very few people have heard of, and I think that's a real shame. So if you remember Rocky's Boots, you should give this one a try. It has life still today. It's been remade. There's a Java version of it that a loyal fan has made, and
cool.
Yeah, we'll link to that so you can play it right in your browser now. Of course, it runs great in Virtual too. At the risk of shamelessly plugging myself too much on the show, I actually also wrote kind of a tribute game to it. I wrote a puzzle game, similar idea. There's a series of levels, and you program, it's level-based instead of sort of open-world-based like the original was, but you program a robot to solve a series of puzzles by building a circuit inside it. It's free, so, I just built it for fun. I will link to that. It is Mac and Windows. Yeah, I think that's about all I have on Robot Odyssey. Did you guys play it at all?
Nope, never actually heard of it, but it sounds very cool. I'm going to have to download it and try it.
Well, I'm glad you haven't heard of it, because that's the goal of this segment, is to expose people to the weird and wonderful underbelly of Apple II games.
I could be remembering wrong, but I think Robot Odyssey was one of those games that if you didn't have the instructions, it was very difficult to figure out.
Definitely.
So I had a copy and kind of played around with it a little bit, but being the inveterate pirate that I was at the time, I did not actually have any way to really kind of learn my way around it. So it mostly sat in my box of discs waiting to be traded for Dirty Harry Adventures.
Yeah, and the other challenge with it, that you raise a really good point. A lot of these games, that we all pirated, of course, how much you played it or how good you felt it was had a lot to do with how well you could just figure out the controls. So I remember the first thing I would do is just, press every key once and try to see what they all did. So this was, definitely one of those games where that strategy would not get you far. In fact, it was sort of an early experiment with GUIs. So you use the joystick to move your cursor around and select items and drag and drop them. And so it was very much a graphical interface in that way. And there was a keyboard version of it. You didn't have to have a joystick, but the keyboard version made very little sense. So you were trying to kind of moving a cursor around with the like IJKNL or something like that, and then so picking stuff up and dropping it. And there was all these modes to get around the fact that there was no mouse pointer because you didn't have the joystick. So with the keyboard it was nigh on unplayable. So it's definitely a joystick game, and so that definitely would have been a barrier to entry as well. To look at it now is just incredibly bold old sort of vision for what educational software could be. I think it's a crying shame that it never got the traction it deserved at the time.
And I guess that brings us to our other new segment, the tech segment. Because we have no music here yet.
Yeah, that's coming. I feel like I'm doing all the talking here, but
that's okay.
I guess you do all the editing, I'll do all the talking. What a team! I guess Chris will do all the guesting. I don't think that's a verb, but yeah, just smile and look pretty, Chris.
I'll do that.
So yeah, in our new sort of tech segment that we're experimenting with, hopefully people are enjoying this. I wanted to give a shout out to Jeremy Rand. So last time we talked about the Apple II development pipeline that I had built on with building on Carrington Vanston's work in order to make it easier for people to develop Apple II software on the Mac.
And out of spite, of course.
Right. Well, yes, the spite aspect was just sort of gravy on top. So this was something that we talked about last time. And so Jeremy Rand has gone and taken that and built on it again. As much as I like to think I'm better than Carrington, turns out Jeremy's better than both of us. So,
oh, no.
Yes, I'm making the not worthy bowing gesture right now, but you can't see it because it's radio. So Jeremy has taken what I did and built he sort of generalized it all, so it's much more general purpose now. It's sort of easier to drop into any project. Mine was kind of like just sort of a simple example of how you could build such a pipeline. So his is one that you can take and drop into any project, a little more sort of more general purpose. And on top of that, he did something which all previous pipelines have really been missing, which is a simple one-click installer for the entire CC65 toolchain. There's been no binaries available of it for the Mac platform. You can download a Windows installer for it, but for Mac, it's always been you have to get it and build it from source yourself. And that's kind of always been the hardest step in the process of getting set up for Apple II development. Yeah, Jeremy solved that problem, which is fantastic. So he's got a really nice set of tools built out of all this stuff, and we will definitely be linking to that in the show notes.
Jeremy Rand has participated and won, I think, the last 2 Hackfests at Kansas
That's
Fest.
right, yeah.
And done so handily, and it's really incredible to see the work that he is able to come up with, the creativity and not just the code itself, but the project that he's working on has always been neat. Next year I will definitely be expecting big things from him. It also crushes the hopes and dreams of little programmers like me who wanted to win and never will now. Thanks, Jeremy.
His version of 2048 that he wrote was for the last Hackfest was fantastic. The animations were smooth. He used both text pages, and it was all written in C. I mean, wrote it all in the spare time between sessions. So
yeah, it's really great stuff.
Yeah, really great. Chris, have you've been doing some Apple II development? Now you mentioned you're hardcore. You're doing a lot of it right on the machine in Merlin, like old school. Have you done any kind of cross-platform development as well, or?
I have a little bit. Yeah, I played around with writing stuff in CC65, kind of compiling in that. But I haven't had much of an opportunity to really build anything kind of like a game or anything like that. And I'd love to start doing that. It's going to take me a while to get up to Jeremy's level, I think. Yeah, maybe by next Kansas Fest.
Yeah, we should try out this pipeline. And this pipeline is kind of an example of where the community really is at its best. Everybody taking something that someone else has built and just kind of adding to it and then putting it back out there. The whole point of it is to make it easier, for someone like yourself to get in and start writing code. So, yeah, you should give it a shot.
Awesome.
The other tech item I wanted to bring up is I've been developing some stuff, and I've been doing some esoteric things with AppleSoft. And one of the things, if you're, messing with ampersand extensions or modifying the parser or any kind of funky things like that to get AppleSoft to do things it was never supposed to, you pretty quickly find you need to know what's going on inside. And there's, documentation in books like What's Where in the Apple and some similar sort of books that have all the AppleSoft entry points and so on. But they're not super well documented as far as, what's supposed to be in the registers when you call them and what's going to be in those registers when it's done and which registers get clobbered in the process and so on. So you can kind of muddle your way through trial and error, but what you really want to be able to do is look at the AppleSoft source code. And there's some resources out there for it. There's a couple of PDFs where people have created that have the source code. There's one of these paged documents, kind of like Scribd, which has the source in it, but it's sort of annoying because you can't search the whole thing at once. Recently I found this site called Jamtronics, and he's got something really awesome. It's the entire source code for AppleSoft on one page, so you can search. And even better, it's actually cross-linked. So all of the labels are all hyperlinks. And so you can jump around in the code just by clicking on these links. So we will have a link to that in the show notes. If you're doing anything with AppleSoft, it's huge. And the comments are all in there, and it's all nicely formatted and labeled. And just, I can't imagine a better way to see the source code for AppleSoft. So I definitely will recommend anyone look at that. And, like looking at the Prince of Persia source code, it's also just a great way to learn some cool tricks. That source code is really quite good also. It's really tight and nicely packed in there. AppleSoft does so much in so little space. It's really clever how the functions all kind of fall into each other. No line of code is wasted. If anything needs to be done by more than one function, then functions are arranged so they can just fall into each other. And so it's great code to read.
I can't wait to check that out.
Yeah. So I guess that wraps up our first sort of official tech segment. If people are enjoying this, please let us know. Drop us a line at podcast@open-apple.net. We love hearing feedback from people. So let us know what of these new segments you like, what you don't like, what you'd want to hear differently. Let us know. And if it's hate mail, feel free to send it to Mike.
Absolutely. Personally, I think that I'm ready to declare that section a resounding success.
Based on nothing?
Right. We do have a correction to make from last month's podcast, and Quinn, why don't you?
Yeah, I should repent here. So this was my fault. I misspoke. So we were talking about rare eBay auctions, and we talked about the D-clock that was recently went through eBay. And I had said that it was Sean Fahey's clock, and that this thing was so rare that the pictures of it on the internet were all his pictures of his D-clock. And turns out it's actually James Littlejohn's, and I knew that. I just misspoke. So my apologies to James for that. We updated the show notes in the last show, but in case anyone didn't check that or whatever, we thought we'd better correct that here. So Mike is, as we speak, interviewing for new co-hosts because clearly he can't trust this one to get stuff right.
Well, no, I'm actually interviewing for my replacement. So.
Oh, I see. Oh, you're just like, oh, screw this, you're out of here? Is that?
I'm sticking you with this show.
Yeah, I see. It says that's my punishment is sticking me with this show.
What's it worth to you? Hold on to your wallet as we look at the latest Apple pickings.
We talked last month about the Apple II Plus and the C drive a little bit. There was there were a couple of threads going over on Apple Fritter. And it looks like, Quinn, you found 2C Plus on eBay. Is that right?
Yeah, despite our insistence that we don't talk about eBay stuff, we keep talking about eBay stuff. So this was another one that was just so interesting. I just could not mention it on the show. So and it also came up right before we're recording, though, of course, it'll be long gone by the time this airs. So someone...
Well, I don't think that one's selling anytime soon.
Well, yeah. At the very least, we'll link to the closed item afterwards because it is really neat. So it's apparently a 2C Plus prototype, and I think there was a lot of discussion on the Facebook group about it. The item was posted there, and a bunch of people who would know weighed in, including Tony Diaz, and I think the conclusion was that it was a legit 2C Plus prototype. There was hand modifications to the board, and I believe the case was untextured, which apparently means that it's an early prototype of the plastics. So if I understood all the text in that thread correctly, that it is in fact believed to be a prototype. And if that wasn't crazy enough, it has a working C drive installed, which is that crazy expansion for the 2C that we talked about last month, which replaces your internal floppy drive with a SCSI hard drive. And there was something, very few of them sold, and something like 5 only known to exist or something, and none of them work or something. Again, one of these crazy rare things, and here's this 2C Plus prototype with one of these things installed and working. This is, mind-blowingly rare. I think they're asking $5,000 for it or something, which, good luck with that. Yeah, I just think it's awesome that such a thing exists. I suspect maybe actually someone put this together trying to create the rarest possible item, because I don't know why would a 2C Plus prototype happen to have a C drive in it. So I wonder if maybe someone happened to own both and put them together in the hopes of making something that they could get a lot of money for. I don't know. Maybe I'm being cynical, but I'm a little suspicious.
That sounds right to me. I don't know enough to be able to look at something like this and immediately go, oh, the 2C Plus is a prototype, but it is missing the up in the upper right corner of the the case normally where it says Apple IIc Plus in the was it Garamond font, I think. Mm-hmm. That's not there. And then there's a couple of shots, internal shots of the machine itself. So people who know better than I do, or I guess than we do on the show, can take a look and go, oh, that's not a normal Apple IIc Plus. So kind of a shame about the price tag, but neat to see anyway.
Yeah, and if our opinion carries any weight, the fellow who made the C drive, we would still love you to remake that one day, because it's a great item and we need more of them. Or release the schematics so people can make them.
Lend the chips to Anthony Martino over at Ultimate Apple II. He's good at cloning stuff, and lend the ROMs to him so he can dump them and start producing clones.
Yes, although I suppose we'd probably want an IDE version, because SCSI drives are a little harder to come by these days than they were at the time, and that would also allow compact flash, which would be awesome. So,
well, I think that brings us to the end of another Open Apple podcast.
Yeah, thanks for joining us on the show, Chris. It was great to have a guest host on this in the hot seat, as it were.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I listen to your show every month, so it's great to be on it.
I'm sorry to hear that. I'll send you links for some better podcasts.
Okay.
So thank you, Chris, and thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next month.
Bye, everybody.
This has been the Open Apple Podcast. Find more episodes, read our blog, or send feedback by visiting us on the web at www.open-apple.net.
Ugh. I had to turn off my fan and now I'm boiling. I'm sweating for Open Apple. I hope the listeners appreciate this.